The flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows across the cramped study, illuminating the stoic profile of Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici. Florence, in the late 14th century, was a city of stone and ambition, its narrow streets humming with the fervent pulse of commerce. But for Giovanni, a humble wool merchant, his world was still largely confined to ledgers and looms. His ambition at first was a modest flame, not a roaring inferno, to simply secure his family's future, to lift them from the respectable but precarious perch of merchants into a realm of undeniable stability. He harbored no grand designs of dominating the city, no dreams of a dynasty, merely a quiet yearning for security in a volatile age. Yet Florence was a viper's nest of financial power. The established noble families, with their vast landholdings and ancient names, held the city's purse strings tight. Their lending practices were predatory, often skirting the church's strictures against usury with thinly veiled legal fictions. To borrow was to enter a labyrinth of debt, from which few emerged unscathed. Giovanni, however, observed the intricate dance of wealth and poverty with a keen, analytical eye. He saw the flaws in the old ways, the inherent instability in a system built on desperation and exploitation. In the quiet hours, long after his apprentices had departed and his household slept, Giovanni began to sketch out a new vision. He crafted a system of lending that was revolutionary in its simplicity and, paradoxically, its adherence to a more ethical framework. He offered more flexible terms, lower interest rates, and, crucially, a discrete method of accounting that separated the capital from the interest, subtly yet effectively circumventing the rigid usury laws without openly defying the church. It was a delicate tightrope walk, but one he navigated with the precision of a master weaver. His clients, often small artisans and struggling merchants, found a lifeline in his innovative approach, and word of his fair dealings began to spread like a gentle, persistent current through the city's underbelly. As Giovanni's enterprise slowly, steadily grew, so too did the subtle shifts in the economic tide of Florence. The established families, once dismissive of the unassuming wool merchant, began to cast envious glances in his direction. Their own coffers, once overflowing, now seemed to drain a little faster, their traditional clients slowly migrating towards Giovanni's more equitable terms. A quiet unease rippled through the old guard, a nascent suspicion that something new, something powerful was stirring. One evening, as the Florentine dusk painted the Arno River in hues of deep orange and violet, Giovanni found himself across a heavy oak table from his cousin, Niccolò. Niccolò, with eyes that held the glint of ancient gold and a smile that rarely reached them, was a man of sharp intellect and even sharper instincts. "Giovanni," Niccolò began, his voice a low, silken murmur, "your enterprise flourishes. But Florence is not a garden for every flower to bloom unchecked. There are serpents in the grass, cousin, who will not tolerate a rival for the sun." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You have built a strong foundation. Now you must build walls. Sometimes, to protect what is yours, you must be willing to prune the branches of those who seek to overshadow you. Compassion in this city, can be a fatal flaw. You must decide, Giovanni, if you are merely a merchant or if you are to be the architect of a new order." The words hung in the air, a chilling whisper of ruthlessness. Giovanni felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had always prided himself on his integrity, on the fairness of his dealings, but Niccolò's words, though unsettling, carried an undeniable truth. The survival of his burgeoning bank, of his family's future, might demand more than just shrewd business acumen. It might demand a hardening of his heart, a willingness to make choices that stained the soul. As the lamp flickered again, casting his face in shadow, Giovanni knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the path to true power was paved not just with innovation, but with difficult, morally ambiguous decisions. The serpent had whispered, and its counsel, however unsavory, felt undeniably potent. Cosimo de' Medici, Giovanni's son, inherited not just a flourishing bank, but also the weighty legacy of his father's quiet revolution and the lingering echo of Niccolo's chilling counsel. Where Giovanni had been a man of humble origins, driven by a desire for security, Cosimo possessed a more expansive vision. He was outwardly ambitious, a keen observer of the world, and a sophisticated patron of the burgeoning arts. Yet beneath this refined exterior lay the same pragmatic, steel-willed determination that had defined his father. He understood that the bank was more than a financial institution. It was a lever, capable of moving mountains, or more accurately, moving the very foundations of power in Florence and beyond. Under Cosimo's astute leadership, the Medici Bank embarked on a strategic and unprecedented expansion. Branches sprouted across the European landscape like well-tended vines: Geneva, Bruges, London, Avignon, Venice, and Rome. Each new outpost was a testament to the bank's growing reach, a node in an ever-expanding network that drew wealth and influence back to the heart of Florence. This wasn't merely about lending money, it was about knitting together the economic fabric of a continent. Cosimo championed and perfected innovative financial instruments, transforming the rudimentary methods of his father into a sophisticated system. Double-entry bookkeeping, a revolutionary concept at the time, allowed for meticulous tracking of every florin, providing unparalleled transparency and control. Bills of exchange, once a niche tool, became a commonplace mechanism for transferring vast sums across borders without the perilous need for physical gold, mitigating risks and accelerating trade. These innovations weren't just practical, they were transformative, laying the very groundwork for modern financial systems. As the bank's financial power swelled, so too did its entanglement with the intricate web of Florentine politics. The Medici's vast wealth granted them an undeniable, increasingly overt leverage over the city's government. Loans to cash-strapped guilds, strategic investments in civic projects, and even direct financial support to key political figures meant that the Republic, in all but name, began to dance to the Medici's tune. Cosimo, ever the pragmatist, understood that economic power without political influence was a ship without a rudder. He cultivated relationships, fostered alliances, and subtly manipulated the levers of power, always with the bank's, and by extension, his family's, interests at heart. Niccolo, now an elder statesman within the family's inner circle, watched Cosimo's ascent with a knowing glint in his eye. His influence, though less direct, was no less potent. He would often speak to Cosimo in hushed tones during late-night discussions over maps and ledgers, subtly pushing for bolder, more assertive moves. "The city," Niccolo would murmur, his voice a dry rustle like autumn leaves, "is a garden, Cosimo. You have cultivated it well. But a garden left untended will be overrun by weeds. Some weeds, cousin, must be plucked out by the root before they choke the life out of your finest blooms." He wasn't advocating for violence, not yet, but for a ruthless exploitation of the leverage they had meticulously accumulated. He urged Cosimo to not just influence, but to control, to not just grow, but to dominate. A pivotal moment arrived when the powerful Albizzi family, long-standing rivals to the Medici, began to openly challenge Cosimo's growing authority in the Signoria, Florence's governing council. Their influence threatened a vital trade agreement with the Duchy of Milan, an alliance crucial to the bank's burgeoning European network. Cosimo found himself at a crossroads. He could pursue a path of cautious diplomacy, risking the agreement and a significant financial setback, or he could leverage his immense financial sway to orchestrate the Albizzi's political downfall. The latter course, while securing the alliance and strengthening Medici power, would undoubtedly involve manipulating votes, subtly discrediting rivals, and exploiting financial vulnerabilities, actions that teetered on the edge of ethical conduct. The choice weighed heavily on him. He valued the perception of fairness, the image of the benevolent patron, yet Niccolò's words echoed in his mind. Compassion, in this city, can be a fatal flaw. Cosimo decided. He directed the bank to discreetly recall loans from key Albizzi allies, to subtly undermine their business ventures, and to finance rival political factions. The pressure was immense, unrelenting, and ultimately effective. The Albizzi's political influence crumbled, their trade agreement with Milan collapsed, and their family fortunes began a slow, irreversible decline. Cosimo had secured the Milanese alliance, further solidifying the Medici's grip on Florentine power, but at the cost of a rival's ruin. He had chosen the path of pragmatic ruthlessness, and the serpent unseen had embraced his decision. This was merely the beginning. The game of power, Cosimo realized, was far more intricate and unforgiving than he had ever imagined. The pragmatic ruthlessness Cosimo embraced, a calculated gamble that secured his family's ascendancy, had, by the late 15th century, solidified into an almost unshakable dominion. Florence, the jewel of the Renaissance, was unequivocally a Medici city. Yet, beneath the veneer of artistic brilliance and economic prosperity, resentment festered. The Pazzi family, another venerable Florentine banking dynasty, watched with seething envy as the Medici star continued its relentless climb, eclipsing their own once bright fortunes. Their ambition, fueled by perceived slights and a deep-seated desire to reclaim their aristocratic prominence, began to coalesce into a sinister plot. Lorenzo de' Medici, Cosimo's grandson, now stood at the helm. He was Il Magnifico, the Magnificent, a figure of extraordinary charisma, intellect, and artistic sensibility, but also possessed a certain youthful arrogance that sometimes bordered on hubris. He embodied the pinnacle of Medici power, a prince in all but name, his hands guiding the Republic's destiny with an undisputed authority. This very authority, however, became the sharpest thorn in the Pazzi's side. They yearned for a return to what they considered Florence's true republican ideals, a vision conveniently intertwined with their own rise to power. The conspiracy was not born in a vacuum. It was nurtured by a potent mix of Florentine political intrigue and external manipulation. Pope Sixtus IV, nursing his own grievances against Lorenzo for thwarting his territorial ambitions, lent his tacit approval, a dangerous blessing that cloaked regicide in religious righteousness. His nephew, Girolamo Riario, driven by a thirst for power and a personal vendetta, became a key orchestrator, along with Francesco Salviati, the Archbishop of Pisa, whom Lorenzo had blocked from his appointment. The stage was set for a dramatic, bloody confrontation that would echo through the annals of Florentine history. The assassination plot was meticulously planned, its details chillingly precise. The chosen moment was Sunday, April 26, 1478, during High Mass at Florence Cathedral, a place of supposed sanctity that would soon be desecrated by violence. The conspirators believed that the solemnity of the occasion would offer the element of surprise, and the presence of so many Florentines would create chaos, allowing them to escape and seize control of the city. The plan was to strike down both Lorenzo and his younger brother, Giuliano de' Medici, ensuring a complete decapitation of the family's leadership. Among the conspirators was someone particularly close to Lorenzo, a trusted friend and associate named Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli. His involvement was a cruel twist of fate, a betrayal that cut deeper than any political maneuver. He had shared meals with Lorenzo, laughed in his presence, and now he held a dagger sharpened for his heart. Such intimate treachery underscored the venomous nature of the Pazzi's hatred, their willingness to corrupt even the bonds of friendship for their ruthless ends. As the bells tolled for the elevation of the host, the signal for the attack, the cathedral erupted into bedlam. Francesco de' Pazzi and Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli fell upon Giuliano de' Medici with savage ferocity, stabbing him 19 times. Giuliano, caught completely off guard, fell lifeless to the marble floor, his blood staining the holy ground. Lorenzo, however, reacted with astonishing speed. Though wounded in the neck by another conspirator, he drew his sword, wrapped his cloak around his arm as a makeshift shield, and fought his way through the panicked crowd towards the sacristy, where he barricaded himself inside. The planned assassination, a double blow intended to cripple the Medici, had failed in its most crucial objective. Lorenzo had survived. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of shock, fury, and an unquenchable thirst for retribution that would soon consume Florence. The Pazzi had struck, but in failing to eliminate Lorenzo, they had merely ignited a firestorm from which few would escape. The air in Florence, still thick with the stench of violence and the metallic tang of fresh blood, reverberated with a single terrifying roar: Lorenzo's vengeance. He emerged from the sacristy, not as a wounded survivor, but as an avenging angel, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying resolve. The Pazzi conspirators, who had dared to spill Medici blood within the sacred walls of the Duomo, would feel the full, unyielding weight of his wrath. There would be no mercy, no quarter. The failed assassination had transformed Lorenzo from a statesman into a predator, and Florence was his hunting ground. The retribution was swift and brutal. Within hours, the streets of Florence became a theater of gruesome justice. Francesco de' Pazzi, still bearing the blood of Giuliano on his hands, was seized and, in a public spectacle designed to instill terror and submission, was hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria. His co-conspirator, the Archbishop Salviati, met a similar fate, his ecclesiastical robes offering no protection from the mob's fury. Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli, the betrayer whose dagger had pierced Giuliano's flesh, managed a temporary escape, fleeing Florence, but his reprieve was short-lived. Lorenzo's agents, relentless and unforgiving, would hunt him across Europe, eventually dragging him back to Florence to face the hangman's noose, his treachery avenged. For Lorenzo, the line between justice and vengeance blurred into an indistinguishable crimson haze. His heart, heavy with the loss of his brother, demanded retribution for the heinous act, but his mind, ever the pragmatist, understood the political necessity of a crushing response. This was not merely about punishment, it was about sending an unequivocal message to anyone who dared to challenge the Medici dominion. The Florentine populace, caught between awe and terror, watched as the Medici machine, usually so subtly influential, now operated with an overt, brutal efficiency. Fear gripped the city, a chilling acknowledgement of the family's unyielding power. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet resentment simmered among those who chafed under their increasingly autocratic rule. But the Pazzi conspiracy had far-reaching ramifications beyond the streets of Florence. Pope Sixtus IV, enraged by the summary execution of an archbishop and the failure of his carefully orchestrated coup, retaliated with the most potent weapon at his disposal: excommunication. Lorenzo and the entire city of Florence were cast out from the embrace of the church, plunging the prosperous city into a profound religious and political crisis. Suddenly Florence was isolated, vulnerable, and facing the wrath of both God and the Papal States, which now allied with Naples to wage war against the excommunicated Republic. With Florence besieged and its very soul threatened, Lorenzo made an audacious, almost suicidal gamble. Defying all counsel, he decided to travel alone, unarmed, to Naples, the heart of the enemy's camp. It was an act of desperate courage, a direct appeal to King Ferdinand I, a man known for his cruelty and cunning. The elder advisor, a figure who had always whispered ruthless counsel into Medici ears, now an old man whose wisdom was etched in the lines of his weathered face, offered a final, chilling piece of advice to Lorenzo before his perilous journey. "Show them strength, Lorenzo," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle. "Show them that even without God's blessing, a Medici commands respect, and that Florence, though excommunicated, will not break. Negotiate from power, not from weakness, even when you possess little." Lorenzo's journey was fraught with peril, a diplomatic tightrope walk where one misstep could mean his capture, torture, or even death. Yet his charisma, his shrewd intellect, and his sheer audacity ultimately prevailed. He spent months negotiating, leveraging Florentine commercial ties, exploiting the subtle rivalries between Naples and the Papal States, and ultimately convincing King Ferdinand that a weakened Florence served no one's long-term interests. He returned to Florence not as a defeated supplicant, but as a triumphant peacemaker, carrying a peace treaty that ended the war and lifted the crushing weight of the papal interdict. The cost, however, was immense. The peace came at the expense of significant political concessions and, more subtly, a further erosion of Florence's republican ideals as Lorenzo's authority, now proven indispensable, grew even stronger. The Serpent's Council had, once again, led to victory, but at a price that would continue to shape the destiny of Florence. With the Pazzi conspiracy quelled and the papal interdict lifted, Florence entered what would become known as Lorenzo de' Medici's Golden Age. The city, under his guiding hand, blossomed into the undisputed cradle of the Renaissance. Artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo found patronage in his court, their masterpieces echoing the intellectual and artistic fervor that permeated every stone and fresco. Philosophers like Pico della Mirandola engaged in vibrant debates, pushing the boundaries of human thought. Lorenzo, now truly Il Magnifico, skillfully balanced the city's political landscape, maintaining a delicate peace among the Italian states, and solidifying Florence's position as a cultural and economic powerhouse. His diplomatic prowess, honed during his audacious journey to Naples, served him well, allowing him to navigate the treacherous waters of Italian politics with unparalleled finesse. Yet even amidst this unparalleled splendor, the weight of power began to subtly shift within the Medici family itself. The relentless pursuit of influence, the constant need for strategic alliances, and the sheer administrative burden of governing such a thriving yet volatile republic began to take its toll. The younger generations, raised in an environment of inherited wealth and unquestioned authority, sometimes lacked the shrewd pragmatism and hard-won wisdom of their predecessors. They viewed the family's immense power not as a delicate trust to be carefully nurtured, but as an inherent right, a privilege to be enjoyed. This subtle erosion of the family's moral compass, a gradual detachment from the foundational principles of prudent management and community welfare that Giovanni de' Bicci had championed, began to manifest in increased extravagance and a growing sense of entitlement. The lines between the family's interests and the city's welfare blurred, often to Florence's detriment. As the opulent displays of Medici wealth grew, so too did a dissenting voice within the city. Girolamo Savonarola, a Dominican friar, arrived in Florence and quickly gained a fervent following. His fiery sermons, delivered with unyielding conviction from the pulpit of San Marco, denounced the rampant secularism, the moral decay, and the luxurious excesses that he saw corrupting the very soul of Florence. He pointed an accusing finger directly at the Medici, condemning their patronage of what he considered pagan art and their increasingly autocratic rule. Savonarola's influence spread like wildfire among the populace, particularly among those who felt marginalized by Medici dominance, and yearned for a return to simpler, more pious times. He represented a looming spiritual and political threat, a stark contrast to the humanistic ideals Lorenzo so passionately embraced. Lorenzo, now in his early 40s, found his health beginning to wane. The immense pressures of his life, the constant politicking, the artistic patronage, and the ever-present threat to his family's position had exacted a heavy toll. As illness tightened its grip, he began to contemplate his legacy, the true cost of his actions, and the moral compromises he had made to secure his family's dominance. The brilliant light of his golden age was now tinged with the shadows of his own mortality and the gathering storm of Savonarola's condemnation. He thought of the Pazzi, of the executions, of the endless machinations, and wondered if the price of power had been too high, if Florence had truly benefited from the Medici strategy or merely traded one form of tyranny for another. The elder advisor, the serpent who had whispered ruthless counsel for generations, now a shadow of his former self, lay frail and bedridden. His eyes, though clouded by age, still held a piercing intelligence. When Lorenzo visited him seeking some final wisdom, the old man offered one last piece of cynical advice, his voice barely a whisper. "The world does not remember the pious Lorenzo," he rasped, a faint, dry chuckle escaping his lips. "It remembers the powerful. You built an empire, not a monastery. Do not regret the choices that made Florence magnificent, for magnificence is all that truly endures." It was a stark, unyielding philosophy, one that had guided the family for decades, cementing their rise, but perhaps also sowing the seeds of their future troubles. Lorenzo de' Medici, Il Magnifico, died on April 8, 1492. His death plunged Florence into an immediate crisis. The architect of its golden age, the man who had held the delicate balance of power within the city and between the Italian states, was gone. His demise left a gaping void, not just in the Medici family, but in the heart of Florence itself, setting the stage for an unprecedented period of political and spiritual upheaval that would redefine the city's destiny. The void left by Lorenzo's passing was not merely a family tragedy. It was a seismic event that fractured the delicate political ecosystem of Florence. The city, accustomed to the steady hand of Il Magnifico, now reeled in uncertainty. His eldest son, Piero de' Medici, inherited the mantle of leadership, but not his father's genius. Piero, often dubbed Piero the Unfortunate, was a man of impulsive decisions and poor judgment, a stark contrast to the calculating pragmatism that had characterized his predecessors. He lacked the political acumen to navigate the treacherous waters of Florentine politics, nor did he possess the charisma to inspire loyalty or quell dissent. His reign began under an ominous cloud, a testament to the fact that power, once earned, required constant vigilance and skill to maintain. Savonarola, whose voice had been a growing rumble during Lorenzo's final years, now thundered with unchecked authority. With the Medici patriarch gone, the friar seized the opportunity to implement his radical vision for Florence. He preached relentlessly against the worldly corruption he believed had infected the city, advocating for a strict puritanical republic guided by divine law. His sermons ignited a spiritual fervor among the populace, who, weary of war and the Medici's perceived excesses, found solace and purpose in his austere message. The bonfire of the vanities became the symbolic culmination of this spiritual revolution. Priceless artworks, books deemed immoral, luxurious clothes, and vanities of all kinds were cast into roaring flames in the Piazza della Signoria, as citizens, gripped by religious ecstasy, sought to cleanse their souls and their city. It was a dramatic repudiation of the very cultural and artistic values that had defined the Medici Golden Age. Piero's blunders further accelerated the Medici downfall. When King Charles VIII of France invaded Italy in 1494, Piero, instead of negotiating shrewdly or preparing Florence for defense, made humiliating concessions to the French monarch without consulting the Florentine government. This act of perceived cowardice and betrayal was the final straw. The Florentines, incensed by his incompetence and the erosion of their republican pride, rose up. The Medici palace, once a symbol of their power and refined taste, was sacked by an angry mob. Piero and his family were forced to flee Florence in disgrace, their exile marking a dramatic and humiliating end to decades of unparalleled dominance. The city that had been synonymous with the Medici name now cast them out, a powerful testament to the fickle nature of public favor and the fragility of even the most entrenched power. The Medici, once the undisputed masters of Florence and the architects of modern finance, were now scattered, their future uncertain. They sought refuge in various Italian courts, their vast wealth diminished, their influence shattered. This period of exile was a bitter pill, a stark reminder of how quickly fortune could turn. Yet, even in their humiliation, the indelible mark of the Medici strategy remained. The innovative financial instruments they had pioneered, double-entry bookkeeping, bills of exchange, and the intricate network of international banking, continued to shape commerce across Europe. Their methods, born of necessity and refined by ambition, had fundamentally altered the economic landscape, proving that while their personal power might wane, their systemic innovations endured. The reflection on the serpent's ultimate impact became inevitable. Had the ruthless counsel, the pragmatic morality, and the relentless pursuit of power truly served the family in the long run, the elder advisor, now surely passed into history, had always championed strength and dominance above all else. His philosophy had propelled the Medici to unprecedented heights, transforming a modest merchant family into the de facto rulers of Florence and patrons of the Renaissance. But it had also instilled a sense of entitlement and a willingness to compromise ethical boundaries that ultimately led to Piero's disastrous reign and the family's expulsion. The serpent's legacy was thus a double-edged sword, the blueprint for extraordinary success, but also a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of unchecked ambition. The Medici family, fragmented and adrift, faced an uncertain future, but a glimmer of hope for redemption, for a return to power, still flickered in the hearts of some. Fueled by the memory of their past glory and the enduring power of their name, yet the Medici spirit, forged in ambition and tempered by adversity, was not easily extinguished. Their exile was not an end, but merely an intermission. The family, though scattered, retained a powerful network of connections and an acute understanding of the levers of power. It was through strategic alliances and meticulous political maneuvering, rather than military might, that the phoenix would eventually rise from the ashes. Figures like Giulio de' Medici, who would later ascend to the papacy as Clement VII, and Alessandro de' Medici, destined to become the first Duke of Florence, epitomized this patient, calculated re-establishment of their dynasty. Giulio, a shrewd and pragmatic cardinal, dedicated years to navigating the treacherous waters of papal politics, exploiting rivalries and forging pacts that would ultimately benefit his family. His elevation to Pope Clement VII in 1523 was a monumental triumph, placing a Medici once again at the pinnacle of European power. With the Vatican's immense spiritual and temporal authority at their disposal, the path back to Florence became clearer, albeit still fraught with peril. It was Clement VII who, in a move that sealed the fate of the Florentine Republic, secured the aid of Emperor Charles V, leading to the brutal siege of Florence between 1529 and 1530. The city, once a vibrant republic, was forced to capitulate, its republican ideals crushed under the weight of imperial and papal might. Following the siege, Florence was transformed, No longer a republic, it became a hereditary duchy, with Alessandro de' Medici, a young and controversial figure, installed as its first duke. This marked the ultimate triumph of the Medici Strategy, a complete metamorphosis from influential bankers to absolute rulers. The family's journey, which began with Giovanni's humble ambition to secure his family's future, culminated in the establishment of a dynastic monarchy. Their innovative financial practices, once a means to an end, had laid the undeniable groundwork for modern capitalism, creating the very tools and systems that would fuel global commerce for centuries to come. The bills of exchange, the letters of credit, the double-entry bookkeeping, these were not merely accounting methods, they were the scaffolding upon which the modern financial world would be built. Beyond finance, the lasting impact of their patronage on the Renaissance was immeasurable. The Medici had not just funded art, they had fostered an intellectual and artistic revolution that reshaped Western civilization. Their commitment to humanism, their support for artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli, and their collection of ancient texts had ignited a cultural explosion whose echoes resonate even today. The splendor of Florence, its unparalleled artistic heritage, stands as a permanent testament to their vision, their taste, and their immense resources. As one reflects on the cyclical nature of power, ambition, and the enduring human struggle between morality and pragmatism, the Medici legacy serves as a profound case study. Their story is a relentless pursuit of power, often at a significant moral cost. Yet, it also illuminates the extraordinary capacity for innovation and cultural flourishing when resources and vision align. The serpent's final, perhaps unseen, victory lies in the very permanence of the Medici's dominance. Their ruthless counsel, their pragmatic worldview, and their unwavering belief in the family's destiny ultimately led to a form of power that transcended temporary setbacks and established a lasting legacy. The Medici, through their complex and often contradictory actions, did not just invent modern banking. They crafted a blueprint for modern power itself. Their story is a powerful statement about the enduring influence of a single family, their intricate legacy, and the true, often immeasurable cost of their revolution. It is a tale that reminds us that while the faces of power may change, the underlying strategies for its acquisition and maintenance often remain disturbingly similar, echoing through the corridors of history, a testament to humanity's perpetual dance with ambition.